I was recently speaking with a man in a quiet, dusty cafe in Ulaanbaatar. He spent nearly an hour gesturing toward the cracked pavement outside and the flickering overhead lights, his voice thick with a specific kind of bitterness. To him, the local decay wasn't just a sign of a struggling economy. It was a deliberate, targeted punishment from the central government in Baghdad. He spoke with the heavy, somber air of a man who had been robbed of an inheritance, frequently referencing a time when his community held the keys to the entire country. To him, this wasn't just poor infrastructure. It was a 1,400-year legacy of power being dismantled in real time. But as we talked, a striking contradiction emerged. When I asked who specifically was failing to fix the roads or manage the local power grid, he pointed to the local provincial council. In that moment, the reality of the situation became clear. Every single official in his province, from the governor to the local clerks, was a Sunni official elected by his own neighbors. Not a single Shia official from Baghdad held a seat of local power there. Yet in his mind, the misery was still their fault. It's a phenomenon where perception in Iraq has become far more influential than administrative reality. What I realized standing there was that the conflict isn't just about who sits in which office. It's about a hard math that some find impossible to calculate. For one community, a slight improvement in daily life feels like a victory compared to the era of Saddam. But for the other, being told to accept a fair share of 25% after a millennium of total control doesn't feel like democracy. It feels like a disastrous fall. That psychological gap, where one man's modest progress is another man's absolute ruin, is exactly what is tearing the fabric of the country apart. That story, that gap between what's administratively true and what feels emotionally real, that's exactly what we're going to dive into.
It's the whole crisis in a nutshell, isn't it? It perfectly captures this broken social contract.
Right. So our mission here is to get past the easy headlines about sectarian conflict and really trace how this deep psychological divide was built, how it was cemented by these very real, tangible failures.
Exactly. We're looking at why the basic building blocks of a state, things like infrastructure, political unity, even just listening to what people want, why they haven't just failed to fix the problem, but have actually made it worse.
And they've reinforced these completely different realities people are living in.
It's a systemic breakdown. Identity politics and this zero-sum thinking have just completely overwhelmed any attempt at functional governance.
So we've structured this deep dive around three really intertwined failures. First, we're going to look at the collapse of the state's capacity to do anything.
And there's no better symbol for that than the electricity crisis. It's constant, it's crippling.
It's probably the #1 indicator of whether a state can actually deliver for its people, especially somewhere like post-conflict Iraq.
Then, from that physical collapse, we'll move to the structural one.
The politics.
The politics.
Yeah.
We'll look at why there's no unified national elite, why the leaders can't even agree on the basic rules of the game, let alone govern effectively.
And finally, we'll dig into that perception gap itself. We have this incredible analysis of Iraqi social media.
A massive survey.
Yeah, a massive survey that shows us the digital reality of what people are actually complaining about, what their grievances are, and why there's so little hope for the future. So let's start with that hard math of the physical collapse, because at the end of the day, if you can't keep the lights on, everything else is just talk. Right.
It's impossible to have state legitimacy without it. And the story of Iraq's power grid, it's not a news story. It's a decades-long saga of one disaster layered on top of another.
It didn't just start in 2003.
Oh, not at all. That's a crucial point. The first major damage was during the Gulf War back in 90, 91. Then you had a decade of sanctions that made it impossible to get spare parts or do basic maintenance.
So the system was just rotting from the inside out.
It was deteriorating fast.
Yeah.
Then comes the 2003 invasion. Widespread looting, more damage from the conflict. They never got a chance to catch up. Reconstruction was always one step behind the next wave of decay.
And just when things might have started to stabilize, ISIS came along.
And ISIS understood the strategic importance of this. Their occupation from 2014 to 2018 caused an estimated $7 billion of damage just to the power sector. This wasn't accidental.
No, it was targeted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They deliberately sabotaged transmission lines. They destroyed key power plants in the Northwest, like Al-Qayyar, that was 750 megawatts, a huge loss, and the massive Beiji plant, which was 1,600 megawatts.
Yeah.
This was a campaign designed to cripple the state's most basic function.
And all this destruction, this constant cycle, it means they can never, ever generate enough power to meet the demand.
The numbers are just brutal. Take 2019, for example. At their absolute peak, they could generate about 19 gigawatts. But peak demand during the summer hit 26 gigawatts. That's a 58% gap between what they have and what they need.
A 58% gap. Just think about what that means for daily life, for hospitals, for businesses, for a family trying to run an air conditioner in 50-degree heat.
It means huge parts of the country are without reliable power for huge parts of the day. And the pressure's just getting worse. The population is growing fast. People are moving to cities. Everyone wants AC.
So that demand is just going to keep skyrocketing.
It is. Projections show it hitting 37 gigawatts in the next 5 years, maybe even 50 gigawatts by 2030.
And how does this compare to other countries in the region?
It's shockingly bad. For an oil-rich nation, Iraq's electricity generation per capita is one of the lowest in the Middle East. They generate less than Lebanon, a country in the middle of its own collapse, and only a little more than Jordan or Egypt, despite having a much, much higher GDP.
It's a total failure of state capacity, the inability to turn wealth into well-being.
It is. It just underscores how the failure to develop this basic infrastructure becomes the primary sign that the state itself is failing.
And this ties directly into what you call the fuel dilemma. It's one of the great ironies, isn't it? Iraq is sitting on a sea of oil and gas, but it can't fuel its own power plants.
It's a chronic, self-inflicted wound. The issue is something called associated gas.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's just the natural gas that comes out of the ground along with the oil. The logical thing to do is capture it, process it, and pipe it to power plants. It's cheap, it's clean, and it's right there.
But they don't do that.
They don't. They lack the processing facilities and the pipeline capacity, so instead they just burn it off. It's called gas flaring.
They just set it on fire.
In 2019, they flared around 25 billion cubic meters of gas. They are literally lighting their own energy independence on fire because they haven't built the pipes.
And because they burn their own gas, they're forced to import it, which creates this whole other set of problems.
Exactly. It's a trap. And it got even worse in 2020. The OPEC Plus agreement forced them to cut oil production.
Right.
Which meant less associated gas came out of the ground, which meant they had an even bigger shortfall at home. So they had to rely even more heavily on imports from Iran.
And what does that dependency cost them? Politically and financially?
It's crippling. The deal with Iran has a capacity of up to 50 million cubic meters a day, but in reality, they're importing about 4 to 5 billion cubic meters a year. And the price is staggering.
Because it's tied to the price of oil.
Right. It's around $5 per MMBtu. Now, compare that to the gas they could be capturing at home from the Basra Gas Company. That costs them about $1.70.
So they're paying 3 times as much for foreign gas.
3 times as much, simply because they have no other options. No LNG import terminals, no secure pipelines to other Gulf states yet. And this makes Baghdad incredibly vulnerable to both U.S. sanctions pressure and Iranian pricing games.
It's such a clear example of how a failure in basic infrastructure directly weakens your national sovereignty.
And despite this urgent, obvious need, the domestic gas projects just seem to be stuck in neutral.
Why is progress so slow?
It's just glacially slow. The big projects to capture flared gas, like the ones with Baker Hughes in Nasiriyah and Garaf, or the big Ratawi gas hub, they're all bogged down in disputes and delays.
The Ratawi project fell apart completely, didn't it?
It did. It was a joint venture supposed to capture over 3 billion cubic meters a year, but Bechtel just pulled out due to disagreements. There were some new contracts signed in 2020, but they're being undercut by low oil prices, which makes investment less attractive, and rising security problems near the oil fields.
So with domestic production stalled, foreign investment became the only hope. We saw these massive, almost revolutionary proposals from companies like Siemens and GE.
They were truly transformative plans. Siemens came in with this huge $15 billion roadmap in 2019. It wasn't a Band-Aid, it was a complete overhaul of the grid.
What were they proposing?
They aimed to boost generation by 25 gigawatts, enough to close the current gap entirely and plan for the future. It involved upgrading 40 gas turbines, building 13 brand new substations, a total system rehabilitation.
And GE had a similar vision, right? More focused on capturing that flared gas.
Yes, GE's focus was on cutting the dependency on Iran. They promised 3.3 gigawatts of new power if Iraq could just capture 40% of the gas it was burning off. They also signed a separate $727 million deal to strengthen the grid and, crucially, to link Iraq's network to Jordan.
Which would give them another source of power and ease the congestion.
Exactly. It's a key part of regional integration.
So you have these multi-billion-dollar plans from world-class experts on the table, but they ran headfirst into Iraq's fiscal crisis in 2020.
Straight into a brick wall. The crisis was immediate and it was devastating. It just showed how utterly dependent the state is on the global price of oil.
When the price collapsed in March 2020, what happened?
The government's revenues were basically cut in half overnight. They needed about $4.2 billion a month just to pay public sector salaries and pensions. Their income dropped to about $2.1 billion.
So they were instantly broke.
Instantly broke. The new government had to start draining its foreign reserves, which were around $67 billion, just to make payroll for May. And critically, they had to postpone the entire 2020 national budget.
Which means all investment spending just stopped.
It just stopped. Dead in the water.
And there it is, the political economy of failure. The financial chaos of the state directly kills its ability to accept the help being offered.
Precisely. The Siemens smart grid model, delayed. The GE deals to fix the power plants, delayed. When Baghdad can't pay its own civil servants, it has absolutely no ability to honor billion-dollar contracts for future projects.
Which means that even the best plans for recovery are completely hostage to the whims of the global oil market.
It's beyond their control. And this paralysis, this inability of the state to act, feeds directly into the rise of the so-called generator mafia.
This is where the failure becomes an industry. It's not just a technical problem anymore, it's an entire economic system that profits from state failure.
The technical state of the grid is already appalling. Over a fifth of the transmission network is basically unusable. Old equipment, bad wiring, dangerous safety issues, but the non-technical problems are just as bad.
You mean theft?
Rampant theft. Unauthorized hooking into the lines, especially around Baghdad. It's a free-for-all.
And where the state grid disappears, the neighborhood generator operators appear.
They step right into the vacuum. These private generators now provide about 20% of the country's total power.
But at what cost?
An extortionate cost.
Right.
They charge anywhere from $60 to $120 per kilowatt hour. Now remember, the top rate on the state grid is just $10.
That's not just a service, that's a massive wealth extraction scheme.
Let me give you the number that really puts it in perspective. In 2018 alone, Iraqis paid about $4 billion to these private generator operators.
$4 billion.
Now, here's the kicker. That $4 billion was the exact same amount as the Ministry of Electricity's entire capital budget for that year.
Wait, say that again?
The people of Iraq are collectively paying a private, unregulated network of operators the same amount of money that the state has to invest in fixing the entire national system.
So the money is there, it's just being funneled into a shadow economy that has every incentive to keep the state's grid broken.
It's a perfect, self-sustaining cycle of sabotage. The state service is poor, so people rely on private generators. Because the state service is poor, people don't pay their subsidized state bills.
So the Ministry of Electricity has no money to invest.
And the generator mafia, who are often protected by powerful political factions, actively fight against any reform that would threaten their multi-billion-dollar monopoly. The decay isn't an accident. It's a business model.
And breaking that cycle, it's not a technical fix. It's a political war.
It is. And that's why getting the grid to a satisfactory level is probably a 10 to 12-year project. The reforms are obvious, but they're politically explosive.
Privatize distribution, reform the tariffs so people pay for what they get.
Exactly. Guarantee good service, but demand full payment. And you have to find a way to break the power of the generator operators.
There is a model for this that has worked inside Iraq, isn't there? In the Kurdistan region.
Yes, the KRG offers a really valuable lesson. They brought in independent power producers, or IPPs, and they rolled out smart meters to manage consumption and make sure bills got paid.
And the service is much better.
Significantly more reliable than what the central government provides. Baghdad needs to learn from that, reinforce the grids, implement advanced metering. At the end of the day, tangible results like reliable electricity are the only way you build the kind of upward mobility that can maybe, just maybe, start to bridge these sectarian divides.
So if the power grid's failure is the physical symptom of the crisis, we have to look at the disease. Who benefits from this failure? And that question takes us straight into the structural collapse, the failure of the political system itself.
The physical failure is a mirror of the political one. You know, after 2003, there was this initial movement, the overthrow of Saddam, a few elections, a constitutional referendum.
A shift away from dictatorship towards some kind of federal system.
A very rudimentary one, yes. But that initial momentum has completely stalled. It's not just stuck, it's at risk of going backwards. It's a process we call de-democratization.
And this stall, you argue, is because they failed to achieve these key structural changes that the political scientist Charles Tilly talked about.
Right. We need to break these down because they explain so much. Tilly said, for democracy to take root, we need three things to happen. The first is you have to integrate trust networks into your public politics.
The trust network.
It's any pre-existing group that people trust. Kinship groups, tribes, religious organizations. They're resilient. They have deep roots in the community.
So instead of fighting them, you need to bring them into the system.
You have to absorb them. But in Iraq, the government has consistently done the opposite, especially with the Sunni Arab tribal sheiks. These sheiks command the loyalty of thousands, but Baghdad has actively resisted integrating them.
Even for something as basic as local policing.
Even then, they've been met with stiff opposition. So instead of becoming part of the state, they remain this powerful, autonomous force outside of it because they were pushed out.
Okay, so that's the first failure. What's the second?
The second is what Tilly called insulation from categorical inequality. It's a bit academic, but it just means your political system has to be protected from discrimination based on ethnicity or religion.
And in Iraq?
It's the complete opposite. Political life is entirely defined by your category. It's ethno-religious, it's sectarian, you see it everywhere.
Like barring certain groups from top military jobs?
Or the well-known practice in the Kurdistan region, where you often have to join the dominant political party just to get a government job. When your identity is the only thing that matters in politics, you can't have a functioning democracy. You have a sectarian headcount.
And the third failure, which seems like the biggest one, is decreasing the autonomy of power centers.
This is the absolute core of the problem. Tilly's point is that a state cannot function if there are powerful groups operating outside of its control. They have to be absorbed.
And in Iraq, that means the militias.
It means the militias.
Yep.
And most significantly, it means the Kurdish Peshmerga forces. They are arguably the most cohesive and effective indigenous military force in the country.
But they don't answer to Baghdad. They answer to the KRG in Erbil.
Exactly. And you cannot have a sovereign state with two separate armies, with two different chains of command and two different loyalties. It's the definition of a failed transition. This is why the system is stuck on just holding elections, the procedure, instead of actually delivering security and order for everyone.
And this all comes back to a fundamental problem with the elite themselves. You need what political theorists Higley and Burton called a consensually unified national elite.
You do. You need the most powerful people in the country to agree on the basic rules of the game, to agree that politics should be about bargaining and compromise, not a zero-sum war for total control.
And the U.S. intervention, right at the beginning, seems to have actively worked against that.
It destroyed any chance of it. The overt favoritism that U.S. authorities showed to Shia and Kurdish officials, while actively sidelining their Sunni counterparts, created these deep sectarian fault lines right in the foundation of the new government.
It basically locked in the politics as war mentality from day one.
It did. It ostracized a huge part of the population and ensured that the whole system would be seen through a sectarian zero-sum lens.
And this led to those three completely incompatible visions of what democracy should even look like in Iraq.
Our perfect storm. The analyst Ofer Bengio laid it out perfectly. First, you had the Shia religious groups. They were the new majority. They wanted democracy, but they did not want a separation of religion and state.
Oh, okay.
Second, you had the Kurds. They wanted a federal democracy, but they absolutely did want a separation of religion and state to protect their autonomy.
Already a direct conflict.
A direct conflict.
Yeah.
And third, you had the Sunnis. Having lost their historic monopoly on power, they opposed what they saw as the dictatorship of the majority and wanted to weaken the central government as much as possible.
So you have three groups who can't even agree on whether the state should be centralized or federal, religious, or secular.
They can't agree on the very definition of the state. So, of course, the system defaults to conflict. The parties focus on grabbing as much as they can for their own group, and the idea of a unified national project just dies.
The structural collapse is undeniable. The physical decay is everywhere. So if the leaders are divided and the lights don't work, how are ordinary Iraqis processing all of this? This brings us to the digital reality, that massive Twitter analysis.
Right. This study looked at 77 million tweets and specifically analyzed about 3.5 million of them that talked about core grievances from 2018 to 2021. It gives us this incredible real-time picture of what's on people's minds.
And what's at the top of the list?
Security. By a huge margin. Almost half, 48% of all the grievance tweets were about security.
And what kind of security? Not abstract ideas, I'm guessing.
Not at all. It was all about immediate, tangible threats. The Islamic State was number one at 31%, then general violence and crime, and then the actions of the various militias. This is a population that is worried about their physical survival day in and day out.
Okay, so security is number one. What comes next?
Next is governance at 20%. People are angry about the lack of representation and the political fragmentation. Then corruption at 16%, focus on the economic cost and the lack of accountability.
And then services.
Services are at 14%, but there's a huge asterisk there. The data period covers the pandemic, and 88% of the service tweets were about COVID-19. If you filter that out, the main complaint before the pandemic was, you guessed it, the high cost of electricity.
It always comes back to electricity. What I find really striking, though, is how low the economy is on that list. Just 2%. How can that be?
It's not that they don't care about money. It's that they see the economy as a symptom of the other failures, not the root cause.
I see.
When you look at the cross-references, economic issues are mentioned in almost 20% of the security tweets. The feeling is, if you can just fix the corruption and the security, the economy would take care of itself.
And when they do talk about the economy, what's the focus?
Overwhelmingly, it's about unemployment and job security and the mismanagement of the country's oil wealth.
The huge protests in October 2019 must have been a major catalyst for all this online discussion.
A massive catalyst. You see a dramatic, sustained spike in tweets about security, corruption, and governance right after the protests start. Social media became the main arena for people to demand a new social contract.
Now, beyond those big picture numbers, the analysis found some really important differences between how different groups see the crisis. Let's start with men versus women.
Right. This is where you really start to see who carries the daily burden of a failing state. On corruption, for instance, men tended to tweet more about the big systemic issues. Corruption in the courts, it's linked to sectarianism. And women focus much more sharply on the direct economic cost and the need for accountability.
The household impact.
Precisely. And you see it even more clearly with services. Women tweeted about the cost of services more than twice as often as men. We're talking 63% of their service tweets versus about 30% for men.
So as women who are managing the household budget and feeling the pinch from paying for electricity, water, healthcare, they are on the front lines of this crisis.
They really are. On governance, you see a similar split. Men focus more on abstract concepts like government legitimacy and national identity. Women were more vocal about the practical problems of political fragmentation and ethnic divisions.
And then you have the Arabic versus Kurdish-speaking users. This feels like looking at two different countries.
It almost is. Both groups were worried about security, but Kurdish speakers tweeted about it far more, about 65% of their tweets compared to 47% for Arabic speakers.
Which is fascinating because the Kurdistan region has been much more stable since 2003.
It is. It suggests that for Kurdish users, the concern is deeply rooted in historical memory, in border disputes, in the fear of what could happen. It's a security focus that overshadows their relatively stable present.
And their economic concerns were completely different, too.
Totally different. Arabic speakers were focused on internal state issues, unemployment, patronage, oil revenues. Kurdish speakers, on the other hand, overwhelmingly talked about aid. Over 70% of their economic tweets were about aid.
Why is that?
It reflects the massive presence of internally displaced people and refugees in the Kurdistan region. Their entire economic conversation is framed by humanitarian dependency and resource sharing, not typical state economics.
It's a completely different social contract.
And this next finding is maybe the most alarming of all. The study looked at how often people talked about the future.
And
almost never. Less than 1% of all the grievance tweets had any kind of future outlook.
Yeah.
It suggests a population that is completely trapped in the present, just trying to survive today's security threats, pay today's bills. There's no mental or emotional bandwidth left to even imagine a different future.
And when they did talk about the future, the mood was pretty bleak.
It was split between hope and hopelessness for a while.
Yeah.
But then in late 2020, after the anniversary of the protest passed with no real change, hopelessness just spiked. It's like that last bit of optimism just got crushed.
And what did they see as the potential path to a better future?
Here again, we see a split. Men tended to look for an external fix. They focused more on external pressure or intervention from other countries.
And women?
Women focused much more heavily on the need for new leadership, internal leadership. And they put a greater emphasis on grassroots, collective action.
So men are looking for a savior from the outside, while women are looking for solutions from the inside, from the ground up.
It's a really critical difference. But the fact that so many are looking for external pressure or even divine intervention rather than unified domestic action just shows how broken the political system is. People have lost faith in their own ability to fix it.
We've covered the physical collapse, the structural political failure, and now this perception gap. It all feels so stuck. How does a society even begin to rebuild trust when the divisions are this deep? To try and answer that, let's look at an interesting parallel. Belfast, Northern Ireland.
It's a really potent case study because even after the peace agreements in Northern Ireland, segregation is still incredibly high. You have these interface areas with literal walls, they call them peace walls, separating Protestant and Catholic neighborhoods.
So the political deal didn't solve the social reality on the ground.
Not at all. The problem is rooted in the physical spaces where people live. And the solution they've been working on in Belfast is this concept of expanding shared spaces.
Neutral territory.
Exactly. Neutral territory parks, shopping centers, public transport, where both communities feel safe and welcome and feel a sense of co-ownership. And what's crucial is that the desire is there. Over 95% of the population said they wanted their local shops and workplaces to be neutral.
The infrastructure just needs to catch up to the desire. And this focus on infrastructure and connectivity seems highly relevant for a city like Baghdad.
Immensely relevant. A key focus was public transport. The idea was to rebrand the city buses as everybody's bus, a mobile shared space.
How do you do that?
On a practical level, you improve security with things like CCTV and a police presence. But you also run a public campaign to actively promote the idea that this service belongs to everyone equally.
And you had to actually change the bus routes, didn't you?
That was a critical insight. Many routes in Belfast just reinforce segregation. They'd run from a Catholic area to the city center and back again, or a Protestant area to the city center and back.
So they never crossed the lines.
They never crossed the lines. So the recommendation was to create new orbital and cross-city routes that deliberately traverse different communities. Instead of just running along the boundaries, it forces interaction. It creates a shared dependency on a single service.
You can just imagine the power of that in a city like Baghdad. A bus route that intentionally crosses from a Sunni area to a Shia area. It's a subtle but powerful political act.
It's a tangible way of breaking down invisible walls. And they applied the same logic to streets. Many arterial roads had become nothing more than transport corridors separating neighborhoods.
Just a way to get from A to B as quickly as possible.
Right. So the plan was to transform them back into shared economic spines. You do that with public realm upgrades, better lighting, more security, community events held on the street itself.
And that does two things, right? It makes the street a destination, which brings customers to local businesses from both sides.
And it creates local jobs that cross that sectarian divide. You're forcing a new collective calculation. Instead of my progress versus your progress, it becomes our shared economic survival.
This is how you start to solve that hard math problem from the cafe.
It is, because segregation is inefficient. It leads to a costly duplication of services, where each community has its own set of substandard facilities. The alternative is to promote unique, shared destinations, a great park, a special cultural center, a major infrastructure project that encourage people to travel across those invisible lines.
So to wrap this all up, it seems Iraq's crisis is really defined by this hard math of political perception, this feeling that one person's gain is another's loss.
And that perception is rooted in a real history. But it's fueled by undeniable failures today. The infrastructure is collapsing, the generation capacity isn't there, and they're literally burning their own natural gas resources.
And the political elite has consistently failed to make the choices needed to fix it. They haven't unified, they haven't integrated those community trust networks, and they certainly haven't dismantled the categorical inequality that defines the system.
And you see the result in that online discourse. People are trapped in the present, obsessed with their immediate security and the corruption that's crippling their lives. The political system isn't focused on delivering results for the people, it's focused on preserving political positions for the elite.
But that Belfast example, as small as it is, it does offer a glimmer of a way forward. It shows that the path has to involve demonstrating tangible, shared progress. If the core problem in Iraq is that one man's fair share is another man's ruin, then the only answer is to build things. A power grid, a bus route, a marketplace that create a new kind of math, where progress for one becomes progress for all. The question is whether the country's leaders can ever shift their focus from the zero-sum game of politics to the positive-sum game of actually building a functional state.